Hello, I'm Professor Sims, and in this video, I will discuss ecology in the biosphere. This is the 9th in a series of 10 lessons held as part of my General Biology 1 course. If you're a student currently enrolled in this course, please consult the syllabus and course Moodle site for assignments, quizzes, due dates, and other course information. In this unit, we will learn about how abiotic and biotic factors affect biogeography and primary productivity. We'll talk about terrestrial biomes, ocean biomes, and freshwater biomes. We'll define global climate change and the factors that affect it. We'll describe and learn how to measure population distribution patterns, survivorship curves, life history patterns, growth regulation, and how different reproductive strategies affect species survival. We'll also learn how humans have expanded their carrying capacity and the long-term implications of unchecked human population growth. And finally, we'll discuss the predator-prey cycle, competitive exclusion principle, symbiosis, community structure, succession, mating systems, and learning. Ecology examines how living organisms interact with their environment, and it aims to understand their distribution and abundance. This interdisciplinary field integrates various scientific disciplines, including mathematics, biochemistry, physiology, evolution, and climatology. Within biology, specialization enhances understanding, as seen in cell biologists studying signal molecules, and ecologists using math to predict conservation outcomes. Conservation biologists require precise data from sociology and urban ecology in order to develop effective management strategies. Ecological research operates on 4 levels: organism, population, community, and ecosystem. The organism level focuses its studies on adaptations like morphological, physiological, behavioral traits. For example, the Carner blue butterfly is a specialist and it is reliant on wild lupine for survival. So the researchers that examine the Carner blue butterfly investigate factors like thoracic flight, temperature, and larval behavior, in addition to the distribution of the wild lupine that it needs for survival. Figure 44.2 helps illustrate the 4 main levels in relation to the biosphere, which is essentially just all life on Earth. So a population consists of interbreeding organisms of the same species that live in the same area, and a population is often defined by geographical boundaries, which can be natural, like rivers, mountains, deserts, or the boundaries can be artificial, such as like man-made structures, fences, walls, etc. Population ecology examines the dynamics of population size over time. Now, community ecologists study interactions among different species within an area. This involves examining conspecific interactions like competition for limited resources within the same species, as well as interactions between heterospecifics such as predation, parasitism, herbivory, and pollination. All of these interactions affect population size and ecological and evolutionary diversity. Ecosystem ecology extends from organismal, population, and community ecology, considering both biotic and abiotic components of an area. It explores nutrient and energy storage and the flow among organisms and the environment. So essentially, it's going from large to small individual organisms, populations, communities. So a population is a bunch of organisms of the same species, and the community is multiple species within the same area. Ecosystem is multiple communities within the same area, and then the biosphere is the biggest one. It's all of the ecosystems on Earth. So the biosphere extends into the atmosphere and all the way down into the ocean, and its vastness is minuscule compared to the known universe. These patterns result from biotic and abiotic influence, and these influences have evolved over an extended period of time. Biogeography explores the geographic distribution of living organisms, their abiotic factors that are affecting them, and this includes things like temperature, rainfall, latitude, elevation. So what that means is you move from the equator to higher latitudes. This is going to show shifts in plant communities. You move from tropical wet forests to seasonally dry forests, and then eventually to deserts. Venturing even further northward, you have deserts that transition into grasslands, then into deciduous forest, and then finally boreal forests before reaching the Arctic tundra. Ecologists studying biogeography investigate species distribution patterns, noting that no species exists everywhere. Some species are endemic, which means they are naturally occurring in a specific region, and other species are generalists that are found across many different types of areas. Distinctive plant and animal assemblages often arise in regions separated by geographic boundaries, like things like mountain ranges and rivers and stuff, and they've been separated for millions of years. So for example, Australia has an estimated 600,000 to 700,000 species, and about 3/4 of those species are endemic. Some regions like Hawaii have unique species distribution patterns. So like Hawaii lacks native land reptiles. They don't have any land reptiles or amphibians, and they only have a few native butterfly species. And then similar to that, New Guinea, they don't have placental mammals at all. Isolated land masses like Australia, Hawaii, Madagascar, and other ones, they have numerous endemic species, including not just animals, but also plants. But these species tend to face endangerment due to human activities like foresting and farming and other things like that, that pose a danger to these critically rare species. Energy flow in an ecosystem begins with the sun. Solar energy is harnessed by various organisms like green plants, algae, cyanobacteria, and photosynthetic protists. And these guys, they convert the sunlight, the solar energy, into vital chemical energy for all other life forms on Earth. Light availability profoundly influences the evolutionary adaptations of these photosynthetic organisms. Terrestrial plants, such as those in the understory of temperate forests, these have devised strategies to capture light that filters through the canopy during the late spring. Conversely, some spring plants grow rapidly and complete their life cycle early, which maximizes the light that they can utilize before the canopy trees develop new leaves in the spring. In aquatic ecosystems, the availability of light is limited and can't reach the bottom of the lake or pond or ocean, and this creates a light-deprived zone where photosynthesis can't occur. In order to thrive without light, aquatic plants position photosynthetic tissue near the water's surface, while hydrothermal vent bacteria use inorganic chemicals for energy instead of solar energy. Another aspect of energy production is nutrient availability, and this is particularly important in aquatic systems like in oceans. So when organisms die in open water, they often sink to the ocean floor, and this sequesters their energy and nutrients unless an ocean upwelling occurs. Ocean upwelling happens when prevailing winds push surface waters away from the coastline, and this causes deeper nutrient waters to rise. This process releases energy and nutrients for reuse by other organisms. In freshwater systems like lakes, nutrient recycling occurs through spring and fall turnovers. Spring and fall turnovers involve the movement of nutrients and oxygen from the lake bottom to the surface, facilitated by temperature variations. Winter results in the surface ice layers overlaying the warm water beneath, and then as temperature rises in the spring, the denser, colder water sinks and displaces the bottom water, and that brings sediments and nutrients to the surface. This is the spring turnover. And then during the summer, the lake stratifies with the warmest water at the surface and the coldest water on the bottom. And these concepts are illustrated in figures 44, 9, and 10. Temperature plays a very important role in organism physiology. It determines the state of the water, as we saw in the last slide. Very few organisms can endure temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius or above 45 degrees Celsius. So that's below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or above 113 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is due to their metabolic constraints. Enzymes operate optimally within specific temperature ranges, with higher temperatures causing enzyme degradation. So in order to survive temperature fluctuations, some animals migrate, others hibernate or estivate. Migration aids in temperature regulation. It helps them find food and mating and mates. For instance, the Arctic tern migrates between the southern hemisphere and the Arctic Ocean annually, and they cover vast distances. Conversely, hibernation and estivation involve torpor states where metabolic rates decrease decrease significantly, and this enables the organism to survive until conditions improve. Water, of course, is a vital component for all life, as it is essential for cellular processes. Terrestrial organisms have evolved adaptations to retain water, like leaf structures that reduce transpiration and convection. Freshwater and marine organisms face unique challenges in osmoregulation due to water solute differences, and they have evolved morphological and physiological adaptations in order to maintain their water balance. Inorganic nutrients, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, impact the distribution and abundance of organisms as well. Plants obtain nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil through their root water uptake, and the soil structure, pH, nutrient contents, all of these things influence plant distribution. Animals acquire nutrients from their food, so their distribution relates to the availability of their food sources. Additional aquatic factors like oxygen, they're critical in both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, but dissolved oxygen concentration in water is going to depend on the temperature and flow speed. Wind influences evaporation, transpiration, and heat loss from organisms, as well as the movement of abiotic factors. Fire acts as a significant disturbance agent in terrestrial ecosystems. Some organisms, like the jack pine, require fire-induced heat for specific life cycle stages. Fire also contributes nitrogen to soil and limits undergrowth competition in some ecosystems. Temperature and moisture significantly impact plant production, and this is known as primary productivity. So the organic matter available as food is referred to net primary productivity. Net primary productivity represents the total annual carbon fixation minus the carbon oxidized during cellular respiration in organisms. In terrestrial settings, the NPP, net primary productivity, is approximated by measuring above ground biomass per unit area, which accounts for the total mass of living plants, excluding roots due to the complexity of measuring root mass. Annual biomass production correlates with abiotic environmental factors. Environments rich in biomass create optimal conditions for photosynthesis, plant growth, and NPP. These regions feature warm, wet climates that support rapid photosynthesis, efficient enzyme function, CO2 uptake, etc., etc. Earth's biomes are split into terrestrial and aquatic realms, with terrestrial biomes on land and aquatic biomes encompassing both freshwater and ocean environments. Terrestrial biomes are distinct due to their characteristic temperature and precipitation patterns, which provide insights into the influence of abiotic factors on biome distribution. Temperature fluctuations, both daily and seasonal, are important for predicting biome distribution and vegetation types. For example, the tropical wet forests, like tropical rainforests found in equatorial regions, sustain evergreen vegetation within a stable temperature range of 20 to 34 degrees Celsius or 68 to 93 degrees Fahrenheit. There's minimal seasonal temperature variation, fostering year-round plant growth within 11 to 12 hours of daily sunlight, and about 30 centimeters or 11 to 12 inches of precipitation per month. And this is going to exceed the annual rainfall of some other biomes. So the tropical rainforest has more rain in 1 month than other biomes have an entire year. We're going to go into a lot more detail about biomes, but before I do that, let's have a look at this clip that gives a nice overview of Earth's biomes.
A biome is a biological community that is formed in response to shared physical climate. Biomes can be either terrestrial or land or aquatic. Up first is the desert. Deserts can be found in North America, Australia, and the southwest U.S. Here's a map of some of the deserts of the world. Deserts have very little rainfall. They can be hot, or they can even be cold. Grassland. Grasslands are found in the U.S., Canada, Argentina, Russia, and even Turkey. They are dominated by grass. They have cold winters and hot summers and average rainfall. Savanna. It is similar to a grassland, but they are found in East Africa, South America, and they're known for having a wet and dry season and warm temperatures throughout most of the year. The rainforest, which is found at the equator, has little variation in temperature and lots of rain. The deciduous forest is found in North America, East Asia, Europe, and Norway. Many of the trees have leaves that fall off in the winter, and they generally have 4 seasons. A taiga can be found in Russia, Canada, Alaska, and Sweden. It is the largest land biome. You will find spruce trees and pines. They have short summers and long, cold winters. A tundra has very little tree growth. It can be found in Russia and northern Canada and has low temperatures, which results in lots of shrubs and mosses. Under the aquatic biomes, you have the ocean. The ocean has high salinity and covers most of the world. An estuary is an area where you have the mix of salt and fresh water. And finally, under fresh water, it has a very low salinity, and you will find ponds, lakes, streams, and again, they have low salinity. So there is a list of some of the major biomes of the world.
So as we discussed, tropical forests have high NPP driven by favorable temperatures and high precipitation, and this results in extensive biomass and exceptional species diversity. In contrast, savannas are hot grasslands with scattered trees that face an extended dry season, limited forest growth, and much lower species diversity. Subtropical deserts situated between 15 degrees and 30 degrees latitude experience aridity with low, unpredictable precipitation levels, and this leads to sparse vegetation and unique water-conserving adaptations. The chaparral or scrub forests are characterized by 65 to 75 centimeters or 25.6 to 29.5 inches of annual rainfall. They feature dominant shrubs adapted to periodic fires, promoting plant regrowth through nutrient-rich ashes. Temperate grasslands such as prairies and steppes undergo pronounced annual temperature fluctuations and feature dense grasses supporting grazing animals. Temperate forests, common in mid-latitude regions, exhibit deciduous tree dominance, annual temperature variation, and consistent precipitation. The boreal forest is also known as the taiga. It lies south of the Arctic Circle, featuring cold, dry winters and cool, wet summers. Boreal forests favor evergreen conifers. These are slow-growing trees that accumulate substantial above-ground biomass but have lower NPP compared to other forest types. And then lastly, the Arctic tundra is situated in the Arctic regions, and they experience extremely cold temperatures, short growing season, and very low species diversity due to permafrost, limited precipitation, and low net primary productivity. Here is a table that helps to summarize the different terrestrial biomes, their temperature and rainfall ranges, and the typical types of primary producers that you would see in each biome. Aquatic biomes, like terrestrial biomes, are shaped by various abiotic elements. However, the aquatic medium, which is water, exhibits distinct physical and chemical traits compared to air. Even in clear water, bodies like ponds and lakes, water is going to absorb light, and this leads to a point where sunlight cannot penetrate into deep water. Terrestrial ecosystems experience temporary factors like fog, dust, or insect swarms that affect light, but usually these are not permanent. Light plays a more central role in aquatic biomes, impacting both freshwater and marine ecosystems. In freshwater systems, density-driven stratification is crucial due to its link to light energy. Meanwhile, marine ecosystems are affected by significant physical water movements like currents, even though they're less influential in most freshwater lakes. So figure 4421 is showing how the ocean encompasses various zones. You've got the pelagic realm, And then within the pelagic realm, you have the oceanic zone on the top, photic zone where sunlight can still get through, aphotic zone where very, very little sunlight is getting through, and the abysmal zone where there is no sunlight getting through. Then you have the benthic realm, the neritic zone, and the intertidal zone, and the continental shelf. Most of the ocean is aphotic, lacking significant light for photosynthesis. The benthic realm is where the majority of sea life are able to survive, whereas the abyssal zone is really low in nutrients and includes sea depths of up to about 4,000 meters. Much of the biomass in this realm is concentrated around warm hydrothermal vents and underwater volcanoes. Estuaries and things like the intertidal zone provide critical breeding grounds for various species. The salinity in these areas fluctuate due to tidal action, and this poses challenges for resident organisms. Some can adapt with halophytic features or behavioral shifts to manage rapid salinity changes. Freshwater biomes are divided into two groups. You have the flowing water and standing water freshwater biomes. So the flowing water ones are things like rivers and streams where water moves in and out through the system. They all have water that moves over land. If it's above the ground, these are called rivers or streams, but there's also ones that are underground, and these are aquifers. Streams usually begin at high altitudes, like where you have runoff from melting snow on mountaintops. And then you have gravity that makes that water move downhill. And as it moves, this water carries a lot of sediment, like dirt and biomass along with it. Any kind of small particles that settle to the bottom of any body of water are called sediments. And these things provide nutrients and a place for plants to grow. Sedimentation and soil erosion can cause streams and rivers to change their course and become more winding. On the upper level of streams and rivers, you can get plankton. So these are photosynthetic organisms that use sunlight to make energy. And you have phytoplankton, but you also have zooplankton. So these are the ones that are not photosynthetic, but they eat the ones that are. So they eat the phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are the producers, and zooplankton are the consumers. The standing water biomes are going to be your lakes and ponds. Standing water biomes also have a benthic level. It's relatively cool. It gets little to no sunlight. It contains mostly scavengers that consume dead organisms. So you have in the benthic level of a standing water biome, you'll have small fish that eat plankton and insects, or you can have larger fish that eat the smaller fish. And the other standing water biome that you see is going to be a wetland. Wetlands are found where the water and land meet. You have roots of plants that are underwater part or all of the year because the soils are soaked with water. And this water can be fresh or it can be brackish. So it can be mixed with salt water. Wetlands are really important because they act as water filters. They remove chemicals. They can be used to treat wastewater. And they're also important for breeding. They're good feeding and nesting areas for migrating birds. They protect areas from flooding. And they act to refill the aquifers. So places where you get fresh water for drinking, for instance. All types of biomes are affected by global conditions, primarily the climate. So over the past 60 years or so, scientists have increasingly been observing significant changes in global climate. These changes are collectively referred to as global climate change. This term encompasses alterations in worldwide weather patterns, particularly a global temperature rise and the resultant climate shifts, mainly due to elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Differentiating between global climate change and localized weather events is essential for discussing this topic. So a specific regional weather occurrence, like an unusually cold week in June, does not constitute evidence of global climate change. This confusion arises from the distinction between climate and weather. Climate refers to the consistent, long-term atmospheric conditions in a specific area. Climate is characterized by predictable seasonal temperature and rainfall patterns. In contrast, weather is the short-term atmospheric conditions over a very, very brief period. Weather forecasts cover about 48-hour cycles. Long-range forecasts are much more unreliable, right? So to grasp the climate and weather distinction, consider if you were planning an outdoor event in northern Wisconsin. You would factor in climate when choosing a summer date, recognizing that basically any Saturday between May and August is going to be better than one in January, right? But pinpointing a specific day for the event is going to be harder because the daily weather variation is unpredictable. Global climate change can be analyzed in 3 different areas: evidence of current and past global climate change, drivers of global climate change, and documented outcomes of global climate change. Maintaining the clarity among these 3 aspects when interpreting media reports on global climate change is really important. Reports sometimes blur the data showing that Earth's changing climate with the factors that are driving this change to measure past climatic variables indirectly. Scientists rely on historical evidence such as Antarctic ice cores. These are able to provide data on temperature and carbon dioxide levels over the past 400,000 years, and it reveals the periodic temperature fluctuations over that time. Also, carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere has varied between 180 to 300 parts per million historically, with correlations between carbon dioxide and temperature change. 3 temperature anomalies mark the past 2,000 years: the medieval climate anomaly, the Little Ice Age, and the Industrial Era. The Industrial Revolution, which started at about 1750, contributed to rising carbon dioxide levels due to fossil fuel combustion. Solar intensity, volcanic eruptions, all of these things influenced ancient climate change, but also deforestation, farming, things like that. They've driven the most recent climate change.
Human activities, from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than 1/3 since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.
Population size is the total number of individuals, and population density is the number of individuals in a specific area. Larger populations can exhibit greater stability due to increased genetic diversity for adaptation. Lower population density may hinder mate finding compared to denser populations. Smaller organisms tend to have higher population densities than larger ones. In order to estimate population sizes, scientists use various methods. For immobile or slow-moving organisms like plants, quadrant sampling involves marking off square areas within the habitat and counting individuals within. Mark and recapture is suitable for mobile organisms like mammals or birds, and this involves marking and releasing captured individuals to estimate population size based on how many are recaptured. Species dispersion patterns, including uniform, random, and clumped patterns, reveal how individuals are spatially distributed within a habitat. Social species often exhibit clumped patterns, while uniform patterns occur in plants, and random patterns are seen in wind-dispersed plants. Figure 45.4 is just giving an example of mark and recapture and how it's used to measure the population size of mobile animals, such as bighorn sheep and the California condor. In this example, we have 80 deer that are captured, tagged, and then released, and then later 100 deer are captured and 20 of them have already been marked. They calculate how large the population size is based on the initial capture, the recapture, and how many of those were already marked from the first capture. Figure 45.5 is illustrating the different patterns of species dispersion. So you have more clumped patterns with social animals, you have more uniform patterns in plants, but also in territorial birds. And then the random pattern is caused by wind-dispersed seeds. Demography delves into birth rates and death rates and life expectancies. Larger populations tend to have higher birth rates, but also higher death rates due to competition and resource limitations. Demographic characteristics influence population growth or decline. For example, equal birth and death rates maintain stability, while higher birth rates lead to growth. Life tables detail population age intervals, mortality rates, and life expectancies. Survivorship curves are another tool that are used to compare life histories among populations. Humans and primates exhibit type 1 survivorship curves, emphasizing parental care and longer lifespans. Birds follow type 2 curves with equal death rates at each age interval. Trees and marine invertebrates and most fishes demonstrate type 3 curves with high early mortality but longer survival for those who do reach maturity. Figure 45.6 is showing survivorship curves and the distribution of animals in a population according to age. Humans and most mammals, again, there are the type 1, then here you see type 2 in birds and type 3 in trees, but you can also see type 3 in invertebrates and most fish. A species' life history encompasses its lifetime events, including the resource allocation for growth, maintenance, and reproduction. These life history traits significantly influence an organism's life table and results from genetic factors, environmental influences, and natural selection. Living organisms require energy for growth, maintenance, and reproduction, but energy availability often limits survival. Plants, for instance, obtain energy from sunlight through photosynthesis, which they allocate for growth, health maintenance, and seed production. Animals, in addition to these functions, must expend energy to secure food and in some cases care for their offspring. All species must maintain an energy budget by balancing energy intake with metabolism, reproduction, parental care, and energy storage. Fecundity represents an individual's reproductive potential within a population, describing the maximum number of offspring attainable if that individual continuously reproduces soon after giving birth. Fecundity inversely relates to parental care. Species that produce numerous offspring generally provide minimal or no parental care, instead directing their energy towards producing many small offspring. These offspring typically possess some self-sufficiency quickly, although their small size makes them vulnerable to predation. So in this case, the strategy is to produce enough offspring to ensure that some of them survive and therefore the species survives. Animal species that have fewer offspring often invest heavily in parental care, allocating a significant portion of their energy budget to parental care, and this is sometimes at the cost of their own well-being. Many mammals, including humans, kangaroos, pandas, etc., follow this pattern. Their offspring are relatively dependent on birth and require a lot of nurturing to become self-sufficient. The timing of reproduction within a species' life history affects its survival as well. Early reproducers have a higher chance of producing offspring, but often sacrifice their own growth and health. In contrast, late reproducers exhibit greater fecundity or better parental care. They risk not surviving to reproductive age. When looking at plant fecundity, again, usually low fecundity plants are going to produce fewer offspring, but they're going to be very much more self-sufficient, energy-rich seeds. And the opposite is true in high fecundity plants. They're usually smaller and they're usually not as self-sufficient. So a lot of them are not going to survive and be able to reproduce. How many reproductive events that you have in a life history is going to be important as well. Similarity involves a species reproducing only once in its entire lifetime, and then they die. These species allocate most of their resources to a single reproductive event, sometimes sacrificing their own survival in order to reproduce. So examples of this are things like bamboo, certain salmon, certain insects. Interparity is a different categorization. These are the species that reproduce multiple times throughout their lives. So some animals like antelope only mate once a year, but they survive multiple seasons so that they can mate once every year. Primates, including humans, attempt reproduction at various times during their reproductive years, despite ovulation occurring only during specific times.
A life history is the sum of the patterns and events that occur at certain ages, especially those related to reproduction and survival. These include, among other factors, the age at which they reproduce, the number of offspring they have, how developed their offspring are when they come into existence, how much they invest in parental care, how many times they reproduce during their lifetime, and when they die. Organisms and populations face trade-offs between having some of these traits or others. If an animal has many descendants, it won't be possible for that animal to invest significantly in their survival. And vice versa, if an animal invests a great deal of energy in the survival of her descendants, so for example, they are more developed at birth or receive more parental care, she will not be able to have many of them. Animals with these reproductive traits may give birth to just one child or lay just one egg each time they reproduce. Because of their low reproduction rate and the greater energy they invest in their offspring, populations of these animals will have relatively low rates of mortality. But for a large number of species, what maximizes the number of offspring that survive is not the maximization of each one's ability to survive, but the maximization of the number of offspring they have. In these cases, a trait that provides some survival advantage, such as parental care, may not be selected for if it requires an energy investment that makes it impossible to have a larger number of offspring. It will reduce the number of animals in a population that reaches adulthood. As a result, species that follow this reproductive strategy tend to have high infant mortality rates, and their individuals will tend to have very short lives. Through evolution, animals end up having some of these traits instead of others, and the traits they end up with shape their life histories. Some mammals, such as great apes, cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises, bears, elephants, and other herbivores, and some birds, such as albatrosses, follow this kind of reproductive strategy of having a few offspring and giving them a lot of care. However, there are very few species of animals who do this. The overwhelming majority of animals follow a different strategy, reproducing in large, in most cases very large numbers, and with high infant mortality rates. In a stable population, assuming that the numbers of members of different generations remain similar, only one offspring per parent will survive to maturity and reproduce. Most other animals will die, often shortly after coming into existence. Most animals exhibit this reproductive strategy, including most species of invertebrates and fishes, amphibians, and reptiles. For example, common cane toads can have clutches exceeding 25,000. The Atlantic salmon might produce close to 20,000 eggs per clutch, while other common species of salmon, cod, and tuna reproduce in the millions, Other animals can have mixed reproductive strategies that also imply having large numbers of offspring. Rodents, for example, can have more than 100 offspring in a lifetime.
So the life histories are describing how populations are changing over time, and population ecologists use mathematical modeling systems to precisely understand these population dynamics and allow for accurate predictions of future changes. Some traditional models are being revised or replaced due to their limited predictive ability, as scientists are always working to create more effective alternatives. When resources are high, populations can just grow and grow and grow and grow, but when resources become limited, the population size tends to plateau.
The maximum number of individuals in a species that an environment can support for the long term is the carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is limited by limiting factors such as food, water, shelter, appropriate space, as well as disease, predation, and climatic conditions. If a population nears the carrying capacity, resources become limited, and if a population exceeds the carrying capacity, deaths begin to outnumber births. Let's take a look at the fish family that lives in the fish bowl. Life is plentiful. There's plenty of space, there's food to eat, there's energy from the sun, and they're able to reproduce rapidly. However, as they reproduce, the resources begin to become limited. They're limited by space and the amount of food. However, they're still able to reproduce. Eventually, there are so many fish that some of the fish begin to die off because there's not food to eat, and the space is limited by the size of the tank. They have reached the carrying capacity. When a population approaches its carrying capacity, the rate of increase usually slows, and the birth rate equals the death rate. The curve plotted for this type of growth is S-shaped and shows a period of increasing growth rate followed by leveling off as a population approaches carrying capacity.
Intraspecific competition, which is competition among individuals of the same species, is going to affect resources, and it intensifies as a population increases in density. Phenotypic variations can result in differential adaptation, which leads to even more competition, and accumulation of waste products can also reduce the carrying capacity of population. Density-dependent factors such as predation, competition, disease, these things affect population mortality as the density increases. Density-independent factors like weather and natural disasters influence mortality irrespective of population density. And then interaction between these factors adds even more complexity to population regulation. We have K-selected species. These are ones that thrive in stable environments. They produce few large offspring with extended gestation and parental care. Examples of K-selected species are primates and oak trees. R-selected species are able to adapt to unpredicted or changing environments. They produce numerous small offspring, typically without extensive parental care. Examples of R-selected species are jellyfish and dandelions. Human population is currently growing at a rapid pace, and this rapid growth raises concerns about the Earth's ability to sustain human populations, potentially leading to issues like famine, disease, and widespread mortality. While humans have expanded their environment's carrying capacity, the technologies used have caused significant environmental changes. These alterations, including ozone layer depletion, acid rain, induced erosion, effects of global climate change, these all stem from human activities. Species diversity, which refers to the number of species and their relative abundance within a habitat, characterizes these communities. Ecologists study community-level interactions to comprehend species relationships, resource competition, and mutual influence. A significant form of interaction is predation, where one organism consumes another. Predatory-prey relationships exhibit cyclic patterns. Predatory-prey relationships exhibit cyclic patterns as exemplified by the lynx and snowshoe hare dynamics shown in figure 4518. While predation plays a role, recent studies suggest additional factors like density-dependent effects may contribute to these cycles. Resource availability within a habitat is often limited. leading to competition among species. The competitive exclusion principle posits that species cannot coexist if they compete for identical resources in the same niche. To mitigate competition, species may evolve to use different resources, occupy distinct habitats, or feed at different times, which can allow them to coexist through resource partitioning. Symbiosis refers to prolonged, close interactions between different species that impact their population distribution and abundance. While some scientists restrict the term to mutualistic interactions, this discussion employs a broader definition. Symbiotic relationships can occur where both organisms are benefiting, one organism is benefiting but the other one's not harmed, or one organism is benefiting and harming the other. So here's some terms here. Commensalism is when one species benefits from the interaction, the other neither benefits or suffers any harm. For example, these could be birds nesting in trees. This is a commensal relationship where the tree is unaffected while providing shelter for the birds and protecting their eggs from predators. Mutualism is where both species benefit. So an example of this would be termites and the gut-dwelling protozoa. The protozoa aid in cellulose digestion for the termite, and it couldn't accomplish this on its own. The termite provide the protozoa a place to live. And then, of course, parasites. This is where one organism is living on or inside of another one and is taking nutrients away from them. It's harming the host. The host is weakened as the parasite siphons its resources. But it's usually not killed very quickly because, the parasite needs a host in order to reproduce. Foundation species serve as the cornerstone of communities, often primary producers. Biodiversity reflects a community's complexity measured by species richness and species evenness, which is their relative abundance. Factors like latitude and climate affect species richness, with equatorial regions being more diverse. Relative species abundance often favors foundation species. Keystone species are extremely important in maintaining biodiversity and community structure. An example of a keystone species would be the intertidal sea star, which affects prey populations, and banded tetra, a phosphorus supplier in tropical streams. Another example of a keystone species would be the gray wolf.
This is a gray wolf. Back in the 1930s, these majestic creatures were killed off in Yellowstone National Park. For the next 70 years, the deer and elk populations in the park exploded, straining the area's carrying capacity. What's more, without the wolves as a threat, the elk didn't feel the need to move around as much, and decimated the local plant population with their incessant grazing. This in turn damaged the beaver population, which relied on willow to survive through the winter. This continued on down the food chain. With the removal of one species, the entire ecosystem began to collapse. In 1995, gray wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, and what's happened since then has been nothing short of incredible. With the wolves back, elk had to be more mobile, moving around to avoid the predators. This allowed the local flora to recover, with once bare hillsides now covered with trees and shrubs. With the trees came the birds, songbirds and ravens and eagles. The willows recovered, which provided food for the beavers. The wolves also acted as food distributors, leaving carrion for countless species, such as ravens, crows, eagles, magpies, coyotes, foxes, and bears. They killed coyotes, which allowed rabbits, mice, badgers, and other smaller animals to recover. The mice and rabbits brought ever more birds of prey. Before the wolves came back, there was just one group of beavers left in the park. Today, there are 9 beaver colonies. But it didn't stop there, not even close. The beavers spread and built dams, which had multiple effects. They tamed the seasonal runoff, created pools that stored water to recharge the water table, and provided shaded areas for fish and aquatic ecosystems for otters and muskrats. But most incredibly of all, the behavior of the rivers themselves responded to the wolves. With the ecosystem stabilized and the trees growing back, there was less erosion of the banks. The rivers flowed straighter and narrower, more pools formed, and all of this in turn reinforced the strength of the new wildlife by providing habitats for the many diverse species of the park. All of this, down to the very geography of the park, was revitalized by the presence of one single species. That's why gray wolves and certain other animals are considered keystone species, because without them, entire ecosystems fall apart.
Succession describes species' sequential appearance and disappearance. Primary succession occurs in newly exposed areas like volcanic eruptions, with pioneer species breaking down substrates, and then over time, pioneer species give way to others, forming equilibrium communities. In secondary succession, areas cleared by events like wildfires will witness annual plants, then grasses, and finally shrubs and trees. The climax community emerges after around 150 years, at which time the community will resemble the pre-disturbance state. Here is a table that helps to summarize the community dynamics in equilibrium versus non-equilibrium communities. And you can see the different factors that affect the equilibrium of a community. So these would be things like abiotic factors, plant and herbivore interactions, population patterns, and then ecosystem or community characteristics. So this is really kind of summarizing the things we were talking about in the last couple of slides. Behavior refers to the changes in an organism's actions in response to stimuli, and behavioral biology investigates the biological evolutionary underpinnings of these changes. The concept that behaviors evolve due to natural selection pressure is well established and has been studied by various scientists. Behavioral biology aims to differentiate between innate behaviors, which are genetically driven and relatively unaffected by the environment, and learned behaviors, which result from environmental conditioning. Innate behaviors are automatic responses to stimuli. Reflex actions, like the knee-jerk reflex, exemplify this category. Innate behaviors also include movements like kinesis, which is undirected movement, and taxis, which is directed movement, in response to various stimuli such as light, or phototaxis, chemical signals, which is chemotaxis, or gravity, also known as geotaxis. Fixed action patterns involve a sequence of movements triggered by a stimulus, continuing even after the stimulus is removed. For example, male sticklebacks exhibit aggressive behaviors in response to red-colored objects during the breeding season. Simple learned behaviors, unlike innate behaviors, allow organisms to adapt to environmental changes. Habituation involves an animal ceasing to respond to a stimulus after repeated exposure. Imprinting is a type of learning that occurs during a specific life stage, and it's important for the maturation process of young animals. Conditioned behaviors involve associations between stimuli and consequences. In classical conditioning, a conditioned response becomes associated with a conditioned stimulus. In operant conditioning, behaviors are modified by reinforcement, either positive or negative, or punishment. Cognitive learning is driven by mental processes, and it's a powerful way for intelligent animals to learn. This type of learning allows for problem solving, abstract thinking, and adapting to novel situations. Primates, including humans, excel in cognitive learning, which enables us to understand complex concepts and manipulate information mentally. Migration is the long-range seasonal movement of animals, and it's another example of innate behavior that allows organisms to adapt to changing resource availability. Foraging is the search for food resources, and it's a behavior influenced by natural selection. Animals often engage in optimal foraging behaviors to maximize energy gain and minimize energy expenditure. Animals use communication to interact within groups, which can involve signals in various forms like visual, chemical, oral, or tactile. Communication can be instinctual or learned, and often it is both. Altruistic behaviors are actions that lower an individual's fitness but increase the fitness of another individual's. These behaviors can result from kin selection, where related individuals benefit indirectly from helping one another. Reciprocal altruism is a form of altruistic behavior that occurs when unrelated individuals engage in mutually beneficial behaviors. In animals that reproduce sexually, finding a mate is a critical challenge. Intersexual selection involves individuals of one sex choosing mates of the opposite sex based on various cues. Intrasexual selection entails competition among members of the same sex for mating opportunities. Mating systems include monogamy, one male and one female, polygyny, one male mates with multiple females, or polyandry, where one female mates with multiple males.
As we touched upon when first introducing natural selection, there are two types of sexual selection, those being intrasexual and intersexual. With intrasexual selection, individuals within the same sex, often males, compete with each other to fight off potential competitors for a female. This can often lead to the development of antlers, horns, or large body sizes. For example, male elephant seals compete over control of a harem where the largest male gains exclusive access to many females. Intersexual selection, on the other hand, is more like a job interview where the hiring manager has many choices among potential candidates. Most of the time, females are choosing among males, as females tend to have the highest investment in reproduction, and males have the highest variability in reproductive success. Females choose traits that will lead to increased reproductive success for their offspring. This can lead to males competing amongst each other for female attention, such as the case with animals who lek, which means to take part in a communal breeding display. Males aggregate in arenas to perform mating displays for the female, who chooses the best performer as her mate. Frequently, males can spend most of their time at the lek when not foraging for food. While it makes sense for females to choose males that offer increased access to food, protection, or those that are free from parasites, why would females choose between males that don't display any of these obvious benefits? One explanation is that secondary sex characteristics signal increased fitness, that is, capacity for survival and reproductive success. Individuals with prominent secondary sex characteristics are displaying their quality as a mate because these features indicate the presence of genes that will somehow enhance the survival and reproductive success of potential offspring. This is according to the good genes hypothesis. The fact that these individuals with unnecessary and potentially hazardous secondary sex characteristics, such as elaborate plumage, can survive at all, demonstrates the influence of these characteristics on mate selection. This hypothesis is in line with natural selection, since the choosing of these mates would lead to higher reproductive success for the genes associated with these characteristics. However, many scientists believe it may be a bit more arbitrary. R.A. Fisher proposed that females can evolve random preferences for arbitrary traits, and that the advantage of the trait is only apparent if females choose males with the trait, and that offspring with that trait are more sexually attractive to females with that preference. If enough females in a population have that preference, then selection on that trait increases so much that it can lead to runaway sexual selection, a self-reinforcing cycle that leads to the evolution of some arbitrary trait. Like a train that's been derailed, the runaway sexual selection phenomenon can become so extreme that preference for disadvantageous traits, like the large peacock's tail, can become the norm.
Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to do the reading. Check the description for more videos related to these topics and leave your questions for me in the comments below.